In a forgotten corner of New York City, where the lights of the skyline faded into darkness, stood an old, abandoned truck. Truck 437 had been parked there for years, untouched and unnoticed. Rust had eaten away at its once shiny exterior, and the tires were flat and lifeless. Local rumors suggested that the truck was cursed, that anyone who attempted to move it met with misfortune. But in a city as bustling as New York, urban legends often went ignored. That was until one night, when a group of friends, out for an adventure, stumbled upon the truck. Matt, the ringleader, was always up for a challenge. He suggested they explore the truck, convinced there was nothing to the old stories. His friends, Sarah, Jamie, and Alex, hesitated, but eventually followed him. As they approached, a chill seemed to settle over the air, and the streetlight above flickered more intensely, casting eerie shadows around them. Curiosity piqued. They pried open the door of the truck, which groaned in protest. Inside, the air was stale, filled with the scent of decay. It seemed as though the truck had been abandoned suddenly, with personal belongings still inside. Sarah's flashlight beam fell upon an old journal on the passenger seat. The pages were yellowed and brittle, covered in spidery handwriting. As they leafed through the journal, they discovered it belonged to a long-haul trucker named Tom. The entries detailed his cross-country journeys, but the last few pages were different. They spoke of strange occurrences, shadows moving in the darkness, voices whispering in the wind, and an overwhelming sense of being watched. The final entry ended abruptly with a chilling line. "The whispers are getting louder. They're telling me to stop, but I can't." Disturbed but not deterred, the group decided to leave. As they stepped away from the truck, the headlights suddenly flickered on, casting a blinding light. Jamie screamed, and Alex jumped back. There was no logical explanation for the truck coming to life, especially given its state of disrepair. Matt, trying to keep his cool, insisted it was just a malfunction. But as they moved away, the headlights followed their movements, almost as if the truck was watching them. The air grew colder, and an oppressive silence fell over the lot, broken only by the faint hum of the truck's engine. Panicked, the group ran back to their car, vowing never to speak of the incident again. Days passed, but the encounter with Truck 437 continued to haunt them. Matt, the most skeptical of the group, found himself unable to shake the feeling of being watched. He began researching the truck, discovering a series of mysterious disappearances linked to it. Drivers who had taken over the truck's routes had vanished without a trace, their last known location always near Truck 437's resting place. Sarah started hearing whispers at night, soft but insistent, calling her name. Jamie's dreams were plagued by the image of the truck's headlights, and Alex reported strange shadows moving in his peripheral vision. The once tight-knit group began to drift apart, each member consumed by their own fears. Haunted by their experiences, the friends decided to return to the lot. They felt a compulsion to confront whatever presence lingered around Truck 437. As they approached, they noticed something new. The truck was covered in strange arcane symbols, and a faint mist seemed to surround it. Sarah, with a trembling voice, read aloud from Tom's journal, hoping to find some clue to appease the restless spirits. As she spoke, the mist thickened and the temperature dropped sharply. The truck's engine roared to life, though the vehicle remained stationary. The headlights flared, illuminating the group in a cold, harsh light. In the midst of the chaos, Matt flipped through the journal one last time and found an old newspaper clipping taped to the back cover. The article was about Tom, the truck's previous owner, who had been found dead in the very lot where Truck 437 now sat. The authorities had ruled his death a heart attack, but the article hinted at foul play, mentioning that Tom had been deeply troubled in his final days, speaking of a curse associated with the truck. The group realized the whispers and sightings were echoes of Tom's last moments, a warning from beyond the grave. The truck wasn't just haunted, it was a beacon for lost souls, drawn to the site of Tom's untimely death. Determined to lay the spirits to rest, the friends decided to perform a makeshift ritual, hoping to break the curse. They arranged a circle of salt around the truck, lighting candles at each point. As they chanted prayers for peace and release, the air grew heavier, and the mist thickened, forming into vague shapes of people, perhaps the souls tied to the truck. The ground beneath them trembled, and the truck's lights flickered wildly. The apparitions seemed to reach out, their expressions a mix of sorrow and desperation. With one final chant, the candles blew out, and the mist dissolved into the night. The truck's engine fell silent, and the lights dimmed, leaving the lot in darkness. The following morning, the group returned to the lot, finding it empty. Truck 437 had vanished, leaving only a patch of dead grass and a few flakes of rust. The air felt lighter, and the oppressive feeling that had lingered around the lot was gone. It seemed the ritual had worked. The spirits were at peace. Each member of the group felt a strange sense of closure, as if a heavy burden had been lifted. They knew they had been part of something extraordinary, something that defied explanation. The experience brought them closer together, bound by a shared secret and a deeper understanding of the unknown. Years later, they would occasionally revisit the story of Truck 437, wondering if the spirits had truly been laid to rest, or if they were simply waiting for the next curious soul to come along. But they all agreed on one thing. The truck was a relic of a bygone era, a reminder of the mysteries that lurked in the shadows of the city, and a testament to the enduring power of urban legends. Eddie Big Rig Dawson was a seasoned trucker, known for his gruff demeanor and unwavering commitment to the open road. For decades, he had traversed the highways and byways of the United States, hauling everything from fresh produce to heavy machinery. His rig, a weather-beaten Peterbilt 379, was his pride and joy, a faithful companion that had seen him through countless miles and memories. One fateful evening, Eddie received a call from his dispatcher, Ron, offering him a last-minute job. The load was to be picked up from a remote location called Last Chance Truck Stop, an old, nearly forgotten establishment on the outskirts of a small town. The delivery was to be made to a warehouse in a desolate industrial area, far from the beaten path. "Just a quick run, Eddie," Ron assured him. "Easy money. You can handle it, right?" Eddie, always up for a challenge, agreed without hesitation. Little did he know, this would be the ride that would haunt him forever. Eddie arrived at the Last Chance Truck Stop as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. The place looked as if it hadn't seen a customer in years. The air was thick with a musty smell, and the flickering neon lights added to the eerie ambiance. He approached the office, finding it deserted except for an old man sitting behind the counter, reading a newspaper. The man looked up, his eyes cold and distant, and handed Eddie the paperwork without a word. Eddie couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, but he pushed it aside, chalking it up to the isolation of the place. The load was a single massive crate, secured tightly with chains and covered in dust. It looked ancient, with strange symbols etched into the wood that Eddie couldn't quite make out in the dim light. As the truck stop employees loaded it onto his rig, Eddie felt an inexplicable sense of dread. He dismissed it as fatigue and focused on securing the cargo. "What's in the box?" Eddie asked out of curiosity. The old man simply shrugged. "Just drive safe," he muttered, before disappearing back into the office. Eddie climbed into his truck and set off into the night, the road stretching out before him like a dark, endless ribbon. The journey was supposed to be straightforward, but as Eddie drove deeper into the wilderness, the road became narrower and more winding. The radio crackled with static, and the GPS lost signal, leaving him to navigate by memory and instinct. The forest on either side of the road seemed to close in around him, the trees casting long, sinister shadows. The night grew darker, the only light coming from the truck's headlights piercing through the thick mist that had begun to settle in. The feeling of unease that had been nagging at Eddie since the truck stop now grew into a palpable fear. He couldn't shake the sensation that he was being watched. Suddenly, out of the corner of his eye, Eddie saw something move in the side mirror. A figure, barely visible through the mist, standing on the side of the road. He slowed down, straining to get a better look, but as he glanced back, the figure was gone. Shaken, Eddie pressed on, telling himself it was just a trick of the light, perhaps a stray animal. But as the miles passed, the feeling of being followed grew stronger. The air inside the cab felt thick and oppressive, and every creak and groan of the truck seemed amplified in the silence. Without warning, the truck's engine sputtered and died. Eddie cursed under his breath and guided the rig to the side of the road. He stepped out, the chill of the night air hitting him as he inspected the engine. Nothing seemed visibly wrong, yet the truck refused to start. As he stood there, the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. The forest around him was eerily silent, the usual night sounds conspicuously absent. Eddie felt a presence, an overwhelming sense of being watched. He looked around, but saw nothing, only the dense mist and dark trees. Desperate to get back on the road, Eddie decided to check the cargo. He walked around to the back of the truck and unlocked the doors. As he opened them, he noticed the crate had shifted during the journey, the chains holding it in place now loose. What caught his attention, however, was a faint, eerie glow coming from a crack in the crate. The symbols etched into the wood seemed to shimmer in the darkness. Against his better judgment, Eddie pried the crate open just enough to peer inside. Inside, Eddie glimpsed what looked like a collection of ancient artifacts, ornate, otherworldly, and utterly bizarre. But before he could take a closer look, he felt a sudden rush of cold air, as if the crate had exhaled. The temperature plummeted, and Eddie staggered back, his breath visible in the cold air. A whispering sound filled the night, a cacophony of voices speaking in an incomprehensible language. Eddie's heart raced as he realized that the voices were coming from inside the crate. Panic set in, and he slammed the doors shut, fumbling with the lock. As he turned back to the cab, Eddie saw something that froze his blood. A figure, tall and shadowy, standing in the mist just a few feet away. It had no distinct features, just a dark outline against the pale fog. Eddie felt an overwhelming sense of dread, as if he were staring into the abyss itself. In a blind panic, Eddie scrambled back into the truck and turned the key. To his immense relief, the engine roared to life. He floored the gas pedal, the tires screeching as the truck lurched forward. But as he sped down the narrow road, the shadowy figure seemed to follow, appearing intermittently in the rearview mirror, always just out of reach yet never falling behind. The radio crackled to life, spewing static and disjointed voices, none of which Eddie could understand. The GPS flickered back on, only to show a route that made no sense, leading him in circles. The road seemed endless, the same twisted trees and dense fog surrounding him at every turn. After what felt like an eternity, Eddie spotted the warehouse in the distance, a hulking silhouette against the night sky. He skidded to a stop outside the building, the tires kicking up gravel. The place looked abandoned, the windows broken, and the doors hanging off their hinges. Eddie hesitated, but the compulsion to deliver the cargo, to rid himself of this cursed load, was overwhelming. He pulled the truck up to the loading dock and cut the engine. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the distant hum of the city far beyond the trees. Eddie climbed out of the cab, his legs unsteady, and made his way to the back of the truck. As he unlocked the doors and pulled them open, he found the crate had been completely smashed, its contents scattered across the floor of the trailer. He turned to see the shadowy figure standing in the doorway of the warehouse. It had no face, no discernible features, but Eddie could feel its gaze, cold and piercing. The whispers grew louder, filling his head, making it hard to think. With a surge of adrenaline, Eddie grabbed a crowbar from the truck and swung it at the figure. The crowbar passed through it, meeting no resistance. The figure seemed to dissolve into the shadows, only to reappear closer, its presence more oppressive than before. Desperation took hold. Eddie knew he had to destroy whatever was in the crate, whatever had cursed this journey. But as he reached down to pick up one of the artifacts, his hands began to glow with the same eerie light that had emanated from the crate. A sharp pain shot through his body, and he staggered back, dropping the object. The realization hit him like a freight train. The cargo was not just any ordinary freight. It was a collection of cursed relics, each imbued with a dark energy that had now latched onto him. The shadowy figure was no mere specter. It was the embodiment of the curse, a guardian of these forbidden items. Eddie's mind raced as he realized the full horror of his situation. He had to get out, had to escape this nightmare. He turned and ran, sprinting out of the warehouse and back to his truck. But as he reached the door, he felt a cold, heavy hand on his shoulder. The shadowy figure loomed over him, its presence suffocating. Eddie struggled, but his body felt weak, drained of energy. He knew he couldn't fight this entity, whatever it was. In a final desperate act, he reached into the cab, grabbed the keys, and twisted them in the ignition. The truck roared to life, and Eddie slammed the door, throwing the vehicle into gear. He floored the accelerator, the tires spinning as the truck lurched forward. The road blurred past him, the headlights cutting through the thick mist. He glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the figure, still following, relentless and unyielding. The radio blared, the static and voices mingling into a cacophony of noise. Eddie's vision blurred, the road twisting and warping before his eyes. He knew he couldn't outrun the curse, couldn't escape the fate that awaited him. As the first light of dawn broke, a passing motorist found Eddie's truck parked on the side of the road. The doors were open, the engine still running, but there was no sign of Eddie. The cargo, too, was gone. The crate and its contents vanished without a trace. The motorist reported the strange scene to the authorities, but they found no clues, no evidence of what had happened. Eddie Dawson had simply disappeared, leaving behind only an empty truck and a lingering sense of unease. The story of Eddie's final ride quickly became a legend among truckers, a cautionary tale whispered in hushed tones at truck stops and rest areas. Some said he had been cursed, others believed he had stumbled upon something he wasn't meant to find. But the truth remained a mystery, shrouded in the mist and shadows of that fateful night. Eddie's disappearance remained an unsolved mystery, a ghost story that haunted the roads. The Last Chance truck stop closed down soon after, and the warehouse was demolished, leaving no trace of the events that had transpired. But some say on foggy nights, if you drive down that lonely road, you might still see the shadowy figure, watching, waiting for the next unwary traveler to cross its path. And as for Eddie Dawson, his fate remains unknown. Some believe he is still out there, trapped in a never-ending journey, a prisoner of the curse he unwittingly carried. Others say he found peace, his soul finally at rest. But one thing is certain. The story of his final ride will continue to chill the hearts of those who hear it, a reminder of the mysteries and dangers that lurk in the shadows of the open road. Jake Thompson had been a long-haul trucker for over 15 years. He was used to the long nights and endless stretches of highway, but something about this particular haul felt different. He had picked up his load from a remote warehouse in Nevada and was headed to a small town in Oregon. The dispatcher had been vague about the contents of the load, but Jake didn't ask questions. He just did his job. As Jake drove, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He stopped at a truck stop to grab a coffee and check on the load. When he opened the trailer, he saw several large, unmarked crates. There was a strange, almost metallic smell emanating from them. Jake shrugged it off and continued his journey, but the feeling of unease persisted. At the next truck stop, Jake met a fellow trucker named Bill. They exchanged stories and tips, but when Jake mentioned his load, Bill's demeanor changed. He warned Jake to be careful and not to trust anyone on the road, especially at night. Jake laughed it off, but Bill's words echoed in his mind as he drove away. A few hours later, Jake's truck started to wobble. He pulled over and found that one of his tires had been punctured by a large nail. As he changed the tire, he noticed a car parked a few hundred yards behind him. The car's headlights were off, and he couldn't see anyone inside. Jake quickly finished changing the tire and got back on the road. As the night wore on, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that he was being followed. Every time he checked his mirrors, he saw the same car, always keeping a safe distance. He tried to shake the car by taking unexpected turns, but it stayed with him. The fear began to gnaw at him, and he found himself driving faster and faster. Desperate for fuel and a break, Jake pulled into an old gas station off the highway. The place looked abandoned, but he needed to refuel. As he pumped the gas, he heard a noise behind him. He turned to see a figure darting behind one of the buildings. Jake called out, but there was no response. He quickly finished fueling and got back in his truck. As he drove, Jake turned on his CB radio, hoping to hear some reassuring voices. Instead, he picked up a strange transmission. It was a garbled message, but he could make out a few words. "Danger, cargo, don't stop." Jake's hands tightened on the wheel. Who was sending the message, and why were they warning him about his cargo? Jake decided to pull over at a rest area to check the load again. As he approached the trailer, he saw that one of the crates had been opened. Inside was a strange device, unlike anything he had ever seen. Before he could inspect it further, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned to see a man in dark clothing running towards him. Jake slammed the trailer door shut and jumped back into his truck, speeding away. The car that had been following him now gave chase in earnest. Jake weaved through the highway, trying to lose the car, but it stayed on his tail. He could see the driver now, a man with a grim, determined expression. Jake's heart pounded as he pushed the truck to its limits. In a moment of desperation, Jake decided to confront his pursuer. He found a secluded spot and pulled over, ready to face whatever was coming. The car screeched to a halt, and the driver stepped out, holding a gun. "You have no idea what you're carrying," the man shouted. "It's a prototype weapon, and they're willing to kill to get it back." Jake's blood ran cold as the man explained that a rogue government faction was trying to recover the stolen device. Before Jake could react, another car pulled up. This one was unmarked, but had the unmistakable aura of authority. Men in suits stepped out, weapons drawn. The man who had been chasing Jake raised his hands in surrender. "They're here to take it back," he said, "but you have to trust me. They'll kill us both once they have it." Jake had to make a quick decision. Jake decided to trust the man. He slammed the truck into gear and sped away, the man jumping into the passenger seat. Gunshots rang out as the suits tried to stop them, but Jake kept driving. The man directed him to a hidden safe house where they could lay low and figure out their next move. At the safe house, the man introduced himself as Agent Harper. He explained that the device was part of a top-secret project, and its technology was far too dangerous to fall into the wrong hands. They needed to get the device to a secure location where it could be dismantled safely. Jake and Harper formulated a plan. They would take the back roads to avoid detection and head to a secure facility several states away. Harper warned that the faction would stop at nothing to retrieve the device, so they had to be careful. As they drove through the night, Jake couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation. He had gone from a simple trucker to a key player in a dangerous game of espionage. The journey was fraught with tension, but they managed to stay one step ahead of their pursuers. When they finally reached the facility, it was heavily guarded. Harper made contact with his superiors, and they were allowed in. As the device was being unloaded, the faction arrived, and a fierce firefight broke out. Jake and Harper fought alongside the guards, determined to protect the device. In the end, the faction was defeated, and the device was secured. Harper thanked Jake for his bravery and promised that he would be rewarded. Jake, exhausted but relieved, watched as the sun began to rise. He knew his life would never be the same, but he was grateful to have made it through the ordeal. Jake returned to his life as a trucker, but he carried with him the memories of that harrowing journey. He had faced dangers he never imagined and emerged stronger. As he set out on his next haul, he couldn't help but wonder what other secrets the open road held.
Thank you for watching Midnight Knocks. If you enjoyed our horror stories, please give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for more spine-chilling tales. Don't forget to check out our other videos for more eerie adventures. Until next time, stay spooky.